Now, our first speaker is Professor Rasool Nafisi.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rasool Nafisi. I just want to start with an anecdote that happened at the immigration when I was getting into the country. I was quite worried because my country of origin is Iran, so I got all sort of documentation to make sure that I'm a legal person. And the very attractive young lady asked me, she said, why are you coming to our country? I said, I'm invited by the university to give a presentation on the likelihood of peace between Israel and Iran. She laughingly stamped my passport and let me go. So I'm glad I'm here. It's my first trip to Israel. I love the country. It's beautiful, very warm, nice people. What I try to do today is to talk about the socio-cultural aspect of the uprising in June 2009, which is, we are still in it. And basically, I'd like to get your attention to some of the symbolism of this movement. Number one, what is different between this movement of 2009 with another one that occurred about 10 years ago in 1999, in the student movement. Number one is not a student movement. It's a national uprising, and you can find all people from all walks of life in it. So this is number one difference between this and the other uprising. The other uprising had about 10,000 people at its peak. This one gathers millions. And also, as you can read from the newspapers, it's the greatest uprising that the Islamic Revolution has ever experienced. It is not organized. It is not organized. It is, while the student movement was largely organized by Ali Afshari and Tabarzadi and others, this one is not. And actually, the leaders of the movement are accidental heroes. They have no credentials to put them on the leadership of such a mass movement. But they are accidentally on the top, but thankfully they are doing very well. And they are steadfast and they continue to lead, and that was not expected from either Karoubi or Mousavi. Again, we will see how the political culture of the country is totally unpredictable, and it doesn't fit into the molds that we usually use in social science or political science. Women are largely represented in this movement, and that's absolutely understandable because they are the victims of this regime, and they have been suppressed for so long. And I'm sure you have watched videos that pulling these people by the hair into the cars and so on and so forth. So you can imagine why they are so largely represented. And actually, the symbol of the movement is a young woman, and she was shot in the heart. And Neda became, at the same moment that she was shot, became the symbol of this movement, and she will remain as such. Another factor to look at is the very important role of modern technology of communications. I would say this is the moment that theocracy loses to modern technology of communications. It is if you look at the previous major upheavals, like the uprising against the communist regime in the Soviet Union, it was on the back of fax machines. The 1979 revolution of Iran was aided and abetted by tape recorders, meaning messages of Ayatollah Khomeini was sent through the telephone lines to Tehran, and then they put it on these audio tapes and distributed it. This particular movement is using multiple sources of communication media, telephone messaging, the internet largely are used, and eventually the tremendous role of the foreign media, meaning mostly the role of the BBC, is very, very important in this movement, to the point that when Ayatollah Khamenei talked about the evils that are threatening Iran, he did not use his usual mantra of U.S. and Israel. He said Britain, and that is a very clear reference to his fear of the BBC, which is such an important medium and continues to give very interesting broadcasting and getting information from Iranian audience rather than from the regular sources. And so therefore you can see how important these multiple sources of social communication, very important, Twitter and Facebook and all that, and they were the most important medium of organizing the mass movement in Iran. Also, if you look at the use of symbolism, it's interesting to look at the use of color green by Mousavi movement. Mousavi is a Sayyid, presumably a descendant of Prophet Muhammad, and that is their color. So they used that color. And at one point, the Basij, when the Basij and supporters of Ahmadinejad were demonstrating, they tried to steal that symbolism, and they also raised green flags. But it seemed that the green sticks with the Mousavi movement, and even Iranians playing in the soccer match use that, and now that is a very important symbol of the resistance against the clerical system. Another one is to look at, and I'm sure you have noticed that, is reference to the symbolism of martyrdom. And both Mousavi, Karoubi, as well as Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader of Iran, said they are ready to be martyred for their cause. But the reality is those people who get really martyred are the young women and men who are demonstrating on the street of Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad, Shiraz, Ahvaz, and other cities. But it seems to be a readiness to materialize the symbolism, and it seems that the symbolism of martyrdom has not died down yet. And also, it is interesting to look at the usage of mosques. When the 1979 revolution took place, the mosques, shrines, graveyards were the domain of the Ayatollahs, of the clerical people, of the clergy, and they became the center for opposition and demonstration. Taking a note from that revolution, the present regime has put a ban on the use of mosques and shrines. And the next step that evidently Karoubi is taking is to go to the graveyard. We will see how the government will or will not stop that. But as you can see, the government is stopping the very traditional way of opposition, meaning going to the shrines or the mosque. Now, another factor to look at is the leadership. Is the leadership reaction adequate? Well, actually, it was very ham-handed, as you noticed. And right away, we saw a fragmentation in the leadership of the country. The symbolism of that fragmentation is the sides that these two brothers, meaning Larijani brothers, took. Ali Larijani and Jawad Larijani, two of the leaders of Iran, took two opposite positions vis-a-vis the present movement in Iran. But even deeper is how the clergy fragmented along the lines of these social movements. In Iran, there are two major clerical organizations, one of them called Jami'at Rohaniyat Mubaraz, another one called Majma' Rohaniyun Mubaraz. Majma' Rouhaniyan Mubarak is a split from the Jami'ah, is the reformist side of it, and it took side, of course, with Mousavi, and so forth. They have issued 5 communiques condemning the suppression and all that. But interestingly enough, the Jami'ah did not do a whole lot. And in fact, the whole body of Jami'ah, the very radical conservative establishment clerics, did not really do anything to support Ahmadinejad, and except their leader, meaning Ayatollah Mahdavi Kani, who supported Ahmadinejad, and Ayatollah Yazdi supported Ahmadinejad, but that's about it. So that is noteworthy that the radical conservatives sort of stayed away from this, most probably under the influence of Rafsanjani, who is the member of this clerical establishment. However, in the oppositional group, in the what they call moderate clergy, you can find very interesting positions too. The most clear and radical position was taken and is taken by Ayatollah Hassan Ali Muntazeri. And Muntazeri clearly condemned the suppression and even issued a fatwa yesterday saying that beating people who are participating in a peaceful movement is haram. And that's a very important statement from a grand Ayatollah. Probably there are some people in the Basij and the IRGC who would think twice before shooting people and beating them up. But other Ayatollahs, like the Sanei, did not really show a full support for the movement, and they sort of stayed behind, but Muntazeri became the most outspoken, as we expected, among the radical oppositional group. Now, the question is whether or not the military leadership is fragmented along the same line, because we notice in the political area, Larijanis show fragmentation. In clerical area, clerical establishments show fragmentation. How about the military? What do we know about them? Is there any sign that the military is sort of becoming fragmented and splintered? We have no particular confirmed news except sporadic rumors that Basij in such and such a masjid put down their guns and resigned, but we haven't heard anything. But looking at the nature of the IRGC and how it is divided along the political line, it is very possible that at the same moment there is a discourse and debate within the IRGC and the Basij and the military establishment, and they are thinking about what is happening, and especially after the fatwas by Ayatollah Muntazeri and others. Is my time up? Pretty much. I have a few more. Okay. As a reminder, the Islamic Revolution of 1979 really took shape and became successful when the military establishment cracked. So we will see if the military establishment in Iran start to show signs of fissure, and that would be the sign of the end of the regime, which is not likely at all. But that would be a great sign to look at. And of course, when the other factors like the oil industry and others stop to work, and if you have such a national strike, then you will definitely see the end of the regime, most probably, but it's not going to happen, simply because the revolutionaries, so to speak, Mousavi and Karoubi, are sort of following the same patterns of 1979 revolution, and you all know well that we cannot repeat a revolution. So because they are following the same pattern, the regime knows full well how to prevent it, and they go step by step to block it and prevent it from spreading. And therefore, the step that was taken in 1979 revolution, meaning general demonstrations, martyrdom. And then after the martyrdom, you have the 7th day, and then you have the 40th day. And for the 7th day and the 40th day, which is a traditional way of commemoration of the dead, people made more demonstrations. And when there were more demonstrations, more martyrdom. And eventually, it led into the closure of all the state offices, factories, and when it really spread to the oil industry, you could see the end of the regime. Now, let me just make one more note about this movement, and in question and answer we talk about it more. One of the things that what do we learn from this movement in terms of political culture of the country? We already noticed the factor of martyrdom that could be used again. So it is an important symbolism. It is an essential factor in the political culture of the country. But also in the speeches of these leaders, especially Mousavi and Khamenei, that I have analyzed, and I can go over it after in the question answer. Both of them said that they are ready for martyrdom. And probably both of them are serious, at least Mousavi is pretty serious, because it is a situation that may lead to his martyrdom. So this is one major factor. And another major factor is that both leaders, meaning Mousavi and Khamenei, showed no sign of compromise. Both of them are steadfast in what they say. They have just one word, and Khamenei says, I'm not going to succumb to pressure, as if succumbing to national pressure is a bad thing and a sign of weakness. And of course, he thinks that he succumbs to pressure and give in an inch, people will ask for a yard, and that will end to what he is fearing of. And Mousavi said the same exact thing. Said, I'm ready for martyrdom. I took the ghusl, or the ritual washing, ready for that. So this is another interesting thing that we learn from this. So there are these two most important things, meaning symbolism, martyrdom, and an inability to compromise, and taking compromise as a sign of weakness is prevalent in the movement.
Thank you very much, Professor Nafisi, for giving us a great head start. Our next speaker is Raz. Please.
Thank you. First of all, let me apologize for my voice. I assure you it has nothing to do with shouting death to the dictator. I was asked not to focus on the reformist opposition, and yet I would like to start by saying one remark concerning whom I consider the big surprise of Iranian politics during the last few years. And this is Mir Hossein Mousavi. I have to admit that if someone would have told me 3 months ago, when Khatami, the former president, announced that he would not run for presidency, and Mir Hossein Mousavi emerged as the reformist candidate, that this politician, who was almost irrelevant in the last 20 years in Iranian politics, would not only lead a resistance movement, but also challenge the supreme leader, I would probably laugh, and I'm sure Mousavi himself would have laughed. Because Mousavi has never intended to become an outsider. Even during his campaign, he said, I'm not really a reformist, I'm a conservative reformist. And now, Supreme Leader Khamenei was right in at least one thing he said during his last Friday's sermon in Tehran. He said that unlike what the Western/Zionist media wants to say about Iran, this is not a struggle between Anderuni and Biruni, between insiders and outsiders. But Mousavi is also an insider, and if you look at the public statement published by Mousavi only a few days ago, you can see that he keeps emphasizing that he's not for regime change. He says that I'm only to try and fix the lies which were evident in the election campaign, and I want to defend the holy, sacred regime which defends Iran freedom, independence, and Islamic Republic. Having read the ultra-conservative press in the last few days, however, I have to say that it seems to me he's gone too far, and even though he didn't intend to become an outsider, he is referred to by most Iranian ultra-conservatives, and I'm not talking only about Kayhan, but also about, I'm also talking about political figures within Iranian politics, for instance, in the Majlis, in the Iranian parliament, comparing Mousavi to Bani Sadr, the president who was impeached in 1981 and left the country to France. And it will be very difficult, in my opinion, for any reconciliation because he crossed the lines, at least according to the conservatives. Turning to the events themselves, I of course agree that the events in Iran during the last almost 2 weeks have been the most dramatic events since the Islamic Revolution, or at least since 1981, when the revolution stabilized itself. This is not just because, as Professor Rasool said, unlike the riots in 1999, for instance, it is not just a clash, or it is not a clash, between the regime and a certain small segment of Iranian society, but it is not only a political struggle between Ahmadinejad and Mousavi, or even between Khamenei and Rafsanjani. This is a much more significant, comprehensive struggle between two worldviews, between two generations, the first generation of the Islamic Republic and the second generation of the Iran-Iraq War, and between the new elite, political elite, and the old elite. In the short profile I wrote about Ahmadinejad before the election, I argued that what is important is not Ahmadinejad. What is important is that Ahmadinejad represents a new generation of Iranian politicians. Many of them fought during the Iran-Iraq War. Many of them were raised and educated in Iran, so they were not exposed to Western education and influences. And they seek to return to the values of the Islamic Revolution. They believe that during the terms of Presidents Rafsanjani and Khatami, Iran moved away from the values and ideas of the Islamic Revolution. They claim that after years of political, social, economic reforms, privatization, Iran should come back to the social and economic policies which are based on the vision of Islamic justice. They also argue that Iran should take a nationalistic approach that is defined of the West, because the West is declining, unlike some of the politicians after the revolution believed. So Iran should aim towards regional hegemony and demonstrate its ambition to become an international force. This is also a struggle between the old elite, the old traditional conservative faction represented by figures like Rafsanjani or by former Speaker of the Majlis, Natek Nouri, and new elements which have become during the last few years more influential in Iranian politics and economics, perhaps the most important of which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and I'm sure Professor Nafisi will elaborate on this issue as well. This is a crucial period, and this is a crucial crossroad to the Supreme Leader Khamenei, because he has been facing, in my opinion, two main decisions. One is mostly political. He had to decide whether to support the coalition of Rafsanjani, Khatami, Mousavi, or to support Ahmadinejad and his allies. Now, personally, I believe that he's made up his mind a while ago. and it was very clearly reflected in his sermon given last Friday when he said, when he acknowledged that his visions, his views concerning domestic and foreign policies are much closer to those of Ahmadinejad than to those of Rafsanjani. But there is perhaps an even more important decision. And this is a decision which concerns the ideological struggle or confrontation between two schools of thought, which we have been witnessed during the last few years in Iran, between what is called the Islamic Republic, Jamhuriya Islami, and the concept of Islamic government, Hukumat Islami. There has been a very interesting debate in Iran between two main schools. One is associated with what is so-called ultra-conservative elements, such as hardline cleric Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, and the other is represented by the more moderate reformists and traditional conservatives. What the first school of thought argue is that Iran should replace the term Islamic Republic with the term Islamic government. And this is not only terminology. They argue that Khomeini himself never intended Iran to become a republic in the Western concept of the world. He never intended Iran to become a republic which puts emphasis on the sovereignty of the people. Iran, they argue, should draw its legitimacy only from God and not from the people. And the supreme leader should not take into consideration the wishes of the people, but the wishes of God. This is one school. And the other school, which was represented, for instance, by former President Khatami and Rafsanjani, say that one of the major characteristics of the Islamic Revolution was people's participation in the establishment of its institutions. And they say the supreme leader has to take into consideration people's will as well. The manipulation of the elections result and the public statements given by Khamenei during the last few days might suggest that he has made up his mind on this issue as well, and that Iran is slowly moving from being a unique governmental model that combines theological, religious theocracy together with a limited participation of the public to become a totally autocratic political model. So this is a very important decision I think Khamenei has made. My last remark concerns the religious establishment. I've been arguing in the last few years that the status of Iranian clerics has eroded during the last few years. I've seen that, for instance, in the growing criticism by public figures, journalists, political figures, against high-ranking clerics. For instance, Dr. Abbas Palizdar, former advisor to the Majlis, to the parliament, who was arrested after he accused high-ranking clerics a year ago of being involved in corruption scandals. Another one, called Nurizad, accused the clerics or claimed that the clerics should not be involved too much in governmental issues. Now, this is, of course, not the first time such criticism against high-ranking clerics is being on the table, but it usually used to be very limited to a narrow circle of intellectuals, clerics, dissidents, and now it seems to be growing. And this criticism goes alongside significant decline in clerical representation in the political institutions in Iran, such as the Majlis. Now, I consider the recent silence, or relative silence, of the high-ranking clerics in the last 2 weeks as very significant. Now, some of it can be attributed, of course, to the tense relations between Ahmadinejad and the clerics, due to his views about the Mahdi and his economic policies, and some disputed decisions he made since he came to office. But it seems to me that this is also another manifestation of the decline of the influence of clerics in Iranian politics. And by the way, this silence did not go unnoticed by Ahmadinejad's allies. Only a few days ago, one of the news agencies in Iran associated with Ahmadinejad criticized the high-ranking clerics, saying that it should not be understood in light of the 24 million votes given to President Ahmadinejad. So should Ahmadinejad remain in office, which seems quite obvious, and should Khamenei be more obligated to the new elites, such as the Revolutionary Guards, I believe it might also further affect the balance of power between the political establishment in Tehran and the religious establishment in Rome, and in the long run, it might even affect the concept of the guardianship of the Islamic jurists, Velayat al-Faqih. This will be it for now.
Thank you very much, Raz, and we will go straight to Professor Bernardo Kapp.
It's a pleasure to be here again, since I think this university, or at least Israel, is one of the few places in the world where we can speak about events in Iran in a very strong way, friendly way, and controversial way. We can have this sort of meeting in the US sometimes, in France, maybe in the future, but it is today in Israel. So I would like to point out two facts, one question with three answers, and three scenarios. What are the facts? First, the elections. These elections are quite interesting. Maybe Ahmadinejad was elected, really, from the polls, with 50, 52, 53% of the vote. And when we are looking at the map of the election of Ahmadinejad, we can see clearly that the Sunni provinces are not voting for him. The Kurds, the Turkmens, the Persian Sunni, the Baluch, the Arab Sunni here, the people, the new bourgeoisie of Tehran, the people following Khatami in Yazd, and of course those following in Lorestan, Rezai or Karoubi. So this map is sustainable. So when you look at this map, it's okay, but one question is that Mr. Ahmadinejad has got until 90% of the vote. It's quite interesting to have such result. If we have a look at the result of the other candidates, we can see that, for instance, Rezai here or Karoubi here have got a strong amount of votes in their own, not province, in their own county, that's all, and usually we are waiting for them to have a huge amount of vote in the whole province. And of course, Mousavi is just elected as a majority only in Kurdistan here, in Azerbaijan, Western Azerbaijan, and Baluchistan. That's all. And if we are looking at the participation, something amazing that shows that this vote is quite interesting, maybe partly true, but 90% false or the result of a fraud, since we can see, for instance, in some places like Mazandaran, with more or less 100% of participants, 100%, it means that everybody has taken, even the old ladies, even people against the regime. But we can say that in Mazandaran, some people coming from Tehran have spent the weekend in Babolsa on the sea resort. A vote there, it's allowed in Iran. So we can understand that for Mazandaran. But in Semnan, who is going for the weekend in Semnan? Iranians are not crazy people, but I don't think they are crazy enough to go for the weekend in Semnan. So these elections are quite important. They are maybe true, partly at least, but the participation shows that something wrong happened. The second fact is that we have in, let's have this map for the debate. Second fact is that the people of Iran went in the street in huge demonstration. It was just not a demonstration of protest of 1,000 million, 100,000, 200,000 people in Tehran. It was more than 1 million. When we are protesting about something, when the students were protesting in 1999, there were some 100,000 in the street. When you reach the level of 1 million, it is something not under control. It is a revolutionary event. And this revolutionary event occurred at least in Tehran, not maybe in other cities in Iran, but at least in Tehran. That's something new since 91. The second fact is, it has been said by the previous people speaking before me, that the Islamic regime, the Islamic system, has been divided inside it. So, a question, why the people of Iran had made such demonstration today? Fraud in the elections, every time. The elections in Iran are not fair. That's usual. Not maybe at this scale, but that's usual. People are unhappy. Unhappiness in Iran is a matter of fact. Why are they so unhappy to demonstrate in the street and to be killed in the street? Something new happened. The answer, I think, has not to be seen inside Iran, but outside. It is the Obama effect. Yes, because in my opinion, what new happened since last time? We have shown that Mousavi is not a strong candidate. Ahmadinejad is much more better. Ahmadinejad was in the countries, in the counties, in the provinces for years and years. He was making a good job for a good candidate. He was supported by the people. He did the best. Mousavi just started for the elections the last 3 weeks. He made a huge, amazing job during 3 weeks. How you can be elected president of the Republic of Iran within 3 weeks? It's quite impossible. So something happened from outside. The first thing is that, the first answer at the question why, is that when Obama tried to shake hands with Iran, he destroyed one of the main pillars of the ideology of the Islamic Republic. The ideology of the Islamic Republic is Mar ba-America, Mar ba-Israel, and to put the ladies under the veil. One of the most important pillars has been destroyed. They disappeared. So, what to do? What can I do? I am the leader of the Islamic Republic. I'm a member of parliament. I am among the elite. What can I do? We have no longer any opponents. And so, from that time, these people were afraid. Because, and it was just said a moment ago, Mr. Khamenei, for instance, is not afraid, and Ahmadinejad, by the US bombing Iran, by the US having sanctioned Iran. It makes them stronger. But with US and West shaking hands, it will be the most dangerous aggression against Iran, a cultural aggression. Remember that Khamenei was shouting since the 1990s about the Tahajjum Farangi, the cultural aggression of the West. For himself, this is a real danger. He is ready to find some compromise on nationalist issues, such as the nuclear issue. It's a matter of security. He can find a compromise on that field, but not on cultural issues. That's the main thing. So, for the guide, it was impossible to have friendly relations with the US. It was much more dangerous than to have bombs. The second thing is that, of course, Mousavi and the others think that they are strong enough to shake hands with the US. They think that Iran is a strong country, Islamic Republic is strong enough with support of God and the people, and so strong enough to find a compromise with the US. And so, for the first time, these elections were important because there was a stake in these elections. Because two different issues were at stake. We can have Hukumat Islami or Jamhuri Islami, two different systems. Previously, there was not such a stake in the elections. Second point in this answer. When you are a nationalist in Iran, and we have got sanctions from outside, what do you do after the nuclear issue, for instance? You join the Islamists to try to have a bomb in one way or the other, because they have no choice. The US is against you, so you have to join the Islamists. Since now, the US is no longer an enemy. You can go towards the international issue. You can become a friend to the US and not betray your own country. So people from the nationalist component of Iran are moving now towards the international sphere of the Iranian constituency, and that's the reason why people were 2 million or 1 million in the streets. Since they have seen that the balance of power has changed, and very, very unhappy of this situation. So a new balance of power occurred, and now in 2 sentences, no, in 4 sentences, the 3 scenarios, which are 4 scenarios, as usual, like the 3 Musketeers. The first scenario is a crisis. Of course, The regime is there. They have taken the power. They have got the tools to take the power and to remain an Islamic republic as usual. And this will be very difficult for Obama and for the relation with the West. Second solution, second scenario, Rafsanjani didn't say anything until these days. The mullahs of Rome, they didn't say anything during the last days, very strong. I think it is a has-been solution. It could be maybe next week, in next month, a solution, but all these people are has-beens, you know, and they cannot find a sustainable issue. The fourth one, the most sustainable one, in my opinion, you know that, is that the former Pasdaran, the veterans of Pasdaran, Mousavi was representative of that, but the Larijani, and especially Ghalibaf, the current mayor of Tehran, they are good Muslims, they are good nationalists, they were fighting on the front, so if they are shaking hands with Obama, we cannot say to them, you are betraying your country. And so they are sustainable enough, strong enough to find a transition before the fourth scenario, but don't think about it, it is regime change. Thank you.
I don't want to start here a revolution, Professor Menashe, but 10 minutes is not enough for each and every one here. But it will have to do for now. Our next speaker is Professor Mr. Kinzer.
All right, I'll try to be a revolutionary and maintain a 10-minute limit. You heard a lot about what's happening in Iran right now. Let me talk a little bit about, as I used to do when I was a journalist, not about today, but more about yesterday and tomorrow. First of all, I think it's important that we always understand the long history that leads up to this moment, not just the history of the Islamic Revolution. If there is a single factor that defines the Iranian political psyche over these last 200 years, it is resentment at the humiliation that foreign powers have visited on Iran. This is something that goes way back to the time of the Afghan invasion, all the way through the 19th century when the British and the Russians were like vultures tearing apart Iran's entrails and taking everything that was worth having, from the right to navigate on waters to the right to sell tobacco. We often hear that in Iran the leadership is guided by an intense and irrational anti-Western, anti-foreigner feeling. That's half right. It's intense. But it's not really irrational. It comes from history. There is a deep sense in Iran that the outside world does not want us to develop. And there's plenty of evidence for this looking back into the past. Now, you could argue about whether that's still true or not. Maybe it changed in the last week or in the last year. But certainly over the last century, this has been a fundamental pattern. All the way back, you might know the story about Reza Shah. There was a time when Iranians were very focused on the idea that you had to have a steel mill to be a modern country. And it took years for Reza Shah finally to make a deal. He did it with the Germans, and they shipped him a steel mill. That ship was stopped in the Mediterranean. This has become part of the mythology. It's because the outside world didn't want us to have any resources. The same trend can be seen through the Mossadegh period. Why was Mossadegh overthrown? Because he wanted to use our resources to build up our economy. So you have to place the suspicion of outside powers and outside influence, not simply in the framework of extreme ideology that just emerged since 1979. It really does have a root. And I think we need to deal with this as we try to think about how we can move on with Iran after this episode is over. And I'll talk about that in a moment. The regime in these last days has really lost a lot of its moral legitimacy. In all countries, people want their leaders to be just. But justice means something especially powerful in the Shiite worldview. And when you lose the popular sense that you are ruling with justice, you have lost something even more profound, I think, than when a Western government loses that. So that does, I think, throw this whole equation out of balance. The elite, as you heard, I think is very divided now. Not just the clerical establishment, but the clerical establishment declining in relationship with other factors in Iran. So I think we need to look at this in historical perspective. one of the other things that shapes Iran, besides the frustration of the humiliations that have been visited on Iran over the past century or 2 centuries, is the century of progress towards democracy in Iran. The Iranian constitutional revolution happened more than 100 years ago. And ever since then, the forms of democracy have been maintained. Even during the Reza Shah dictatorship and during the Mohammad Reza Shah dictatorship and during this current regime, you've always had elections. The elections have not always been fair. The parliament has not always had any authority. But all regimes have felt the need to maintain the forms of democracy. And that does something, I think, very positive, even though it doesn't give you real democracy often, because a lot of times these forms are not real. But what it does give people over a period of generations is an understanding of the democratic way of life, that you have political parties. You vote for parties that represent your belief, not your religion, your race, your sectional allegiance, your ethnic group. This is a huge leap, and that can only be done over a period of decades and generations. There is a strong democratic potential inside Iranian society that you don't see in the societies in most of the countries that are around Iran. Without that, you wouldn't be seeing what you're seeing on the streets of Iran today. So let me talk a little bit about what I think this means now. Where do we go from here? You have a regime that is morally weak, and I'm going to take the assumption that was stated earlier that when this ends, we're not going to see regime change. Now, I wouldn't want to predict that for sure. One thing we've learned about Iran is that in this opaque political system, we're dealing with unprecedented changes, and we really can't predict where things are going. Nonetheless, I think it's at least feasible that when this settles down, the regime's leaders will ask themselves, what can we do to try to regain some of our legitimacy? As you just heard, and I agree with this, there can't be cultural compromises, the kinds of cultural compromises that I think most of the people on the streets of Iran now are calling for. I think more than anything, what they would like is get the government out of our lives. Let us live our own lives. This is not going to be very difficult for the regime to concede. Nonetheless, and I agree with that, what was said earlier, that there is the possibility that making some strategic compromises might be a possible way for this regime to seem like it was accepting some of popular protests. You heard about the Obama effect. I wonder if the Obama effect might not have been just the opposite. And again, this is all speculation since we don't know what goes on inside the councils of this regime. But maybe it wasn't the Obama effect that sent all these people onto the streets and gave them this self-confidence like you saw, for example, in Lebanon. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it was the Obama effect that led the supreme leader and others to say, we better declare this thing over in 1 hour and then crack down on anyone who protests, because otherwise the whole thing is going to spin out of control. Maybe had George Bush still been in power, they wouldn't have felt the need to do this. So what exactly was the Obama effect? I think we can debate it. And it's one of those great debates where there is no answer, so we can debate it indefinitely. Although I won't do that. Don't worry. So where do we take this from here? I would say this. I think the United States and the West have great long-term strategic interests in common with Iran. I don't believe that Iran inevitably poses a threat to Western security interests. It has up to now. Its policies up to now and its intervention in this region certainly do. But I don't think that's necessarily inevitable. Both of these countries, the United States and Iran, are desperate to stabilize Iraq. Iran could actually be our ticket out of Iraq. If Iran really wanted to cooperate, Iran has more ability to stabilize Iraq than any country, including the United States. Iran also has considerable influence in Afghanistan. Iran would like to keep Russian influence out of the Middle East, which is a stated goal of U.S. policy, although there seem to be a couple of people in this government here in this country that don't necessarily agree with that. The Iranian government is desperately in need of multi-billion-dollar investment in its oil infrastructure, which is a complete disaster. The United States is perfectly poised, better than any other country, to provide that. So there are potential strategic overlaps. Now, if it were easy to reach an agreement with Iran, we would have reached one a long time ago. Trying to reach an agreement is going to be very difficult, and nobody would want to bet that it's possible. Nonetheless, Iran is so important. It's not just important for us to try to curb its bad behavior, but actually it can have a positive effect if we could bring it to a different strategic perspective. That I really do think it is worth Obama's time and it's worth Obama's energy to try every avenue to see if this isn't possible. Now, there will be some considerable difficulties, and they're not only political difficulties. Those are huge. But I think there's also a great cultural gap that needs to be bridged between these countries. Part of it is that when we sit across the table from Iranian leaders, we're sitting across from people that really have no experience in the Western world. This is one of the ill effects of sanctions. Those sanctions have been very effective in one way, which is that they've brought a whole generation of Iranians to power who have no idea about how the real world works. They're caught up in their own dream palace. It's very difficult to negotiate with people on that basis. I could easily understand, for example, that when the two sides sit down for the first time, and this is a conventional diplomatic tool when longtime rivals begin their negotiations, one of the things they sometimes do is, please tell us one thing that you would really like to get out of this negotiation, and then we will tell you one thing we would like to get out of it. If negotiations began that way, I could imagine the Americans saying, well, the one thing we would like to get more than anything is an arrangement on the nuclear issue. What would you like to get? And the Iranians would say, we want dignity. And the Americans would say, well, yeah, dignity, but what specifically? What goal? And they would say, respect us. So they're talking in different languages. There's a huge cultural gap to overcome. Nonetheless, I do think that it is a very real possibility that out of this protest, if there's one thing positive that can come out of it, assuming that we don't get the regime change result that we want, there might be a reassessment of the possibility for accommodation with the outside world. If the regime feels that it has to make a choice in order to stabilize itself and reestablish a measure of legitimacy, either we're going to have to make some cultural and political concessions inside Iran, or we're going to have to make some strategic concessions outside Iran. I think the outside one looks more attractive to them. One thing I think we need to bear in mind as the United States looks at Iran is also something I think we always need to bear in mind when the United States looks at Israel. And that is, no country can be expected to make security concessions unless it feels safe. That's just as true of Iran as it is of Israel. If there is a way to bring Iran into a web of security arrangements that will create a new balance in the Middle East, that will stabilize the situation. It may make Iran more able to deal with the outside world. So I think there is that possibility. Now, if we are able to start a negotiating process with Iran, I think I would like to see it broadened in one way, and I think this is very important. One of the real problems of United States relations in this part of the world is that we often have this elite-to-elite relationship. We have an agreement with the ruling class in a country, and then the people turn against us. Especially after what's just happened in Iran, we must make it very
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks to Professor Menashe for having invited me to speak today. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you. Like my compatriot, Dr. Nafisi, let me start by a small anecdote. It's a telephone call I received from Tehran a few days after the election from one of my to the Iranian Revolution. Whereas the Iranian Revolution was a mass movement which was described by scholars and men of knowledge as a movement, as a reaction by a traditional society against forces of modernism. This events of the last several days has been a reaction on the part of forces of modernism against traditional conservatism. In more than 150 years of my country's experience with modern thought, with democratic ideals, modern government, the events of the last several days is the first event that has not been led by the clergy, and it is not for revolutionary reasons or for reasons of religion. It is for democracy. It is for the right to be counted as a citizen. These are unique developments, ladies and gentlemen. And having said that, let me tell you that this is indeed a historical point. Whatever happens in the history of my country, history is being made right now as we speak. The general dynamics of Iranian politics has changed. What has taken place is a major body blow, major incursion of a major body blow into the body of this ruling establishment. A ruling establishment that at best represents maybe 10 to 15% of the society and a capability to mobilize another 10 to 15% of society at moments of, you might say, need, using the resources of the country. No matter how you look at it, I have commissioned a professional poll in this regard from people inside Iran. No matter how you look at it, the bulk of Iranian society does not like the way the country is going, does not like the way in which it is being led. Iran was the cradle of modern-day Islamic fundamentalism, but Islamic fundamentalism in Iran has been dead for a very, very long time. This is a dictatorship that is run on secular grounds. It is run by the clergy, but it is not run. People do not respect Ayatollah Khamenei because they think he has God Almighty on his side. They respect him, or they acknowledge him because of the power that he is able to impose through force and pressure. It has nothing to do with God. So this is gone. And the religious establishment, to which some of my other colleagues here alluded to earlier, I've been studying these issues for 30 years on a consistent basis. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, the religious establishment in Iran has been 90% of it, I would say. I'm just throwing a figure just to make a point. The overwhelming majority of the clerics within the religious constituency in Iran have been against the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic government of Ayatollah Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei on religious ground, I would say from the early 1980s. You have the statements of people like Ayatollah Shariat Madari, who was essentially sidelined and forced, into terrible conditions before his death in 1985, to all the others. The leading marjats in the Islamic faith have issues with Ayatollah Khamenei given his interpretation of Islamic government and the Velayat al-Faqih, which is the basis, the fundamental basis of Iran's constitution, which gives him the authority. Now, having said that, it is my view that things have changed. Everything that we have studied and considered with regards to Iran in the course of the last 30 years have changed as a consequence of events that have taken place in the last 10 days. Whether the demonstrators succeed or do not succeed, things have changed. All the previous analysis, in my view, are essentially defunct and non-applicable. All those people who said that something like this was likely to happen have been vindicated. All those who said and who advocated a line of accommodation with the regime have egg on their face, because today you don't know which regime to make this deal with. The fact is that the perpetuation of the Islamic Republic, if they are able to succeed in quelling the protest of innocent people who want change, the Obama-style change in Iran, it would convert the Islamic Republic of Iran from a quasi-Islamic form of democracy into a pure military dictatorship. There is no question that Mr. Ahmadinejad or Khamenei can continue to govern without the support of the military backing them in every step. In many ways, all of these people who criticize the Shah with the same kind of allegations would have reverted to exercising power with the same kind of tools that he had. So what I am saying is that what is needed now, and when you look to the future, and what is imperative in my view for Western governments and the United States, the Arab countries, including Israel, is to look at Iran from a new dimension. The sooner this is done, the better they are able to get a grip on a situation that need not necessarily proceed in the manner in which everyone in this panel, for example, might agree or think that Ahmadinejad's handle on power is going to be permanent, or that Khamenei is going to have a permanent situation in the manner that has been prescribed. The actors who are on the scene have not changed. How they are deployed has changed. You have women activists, you have students, you have unions, you have ethnic groups with serious demands on this government. You have a country in which the economy has failed. It is unlikely to be able to get a grip on the economy, to be able to get a grip on such important issues for ordinary citizens as employment, inflation, things of that nature. And given the continuation of this instability, if it was to continue for a while longer, then obviously the effects or what the derivatives from that for the regime is going to be significantly different. We need new look at Iran, new analysis, see how forces of civil society, which are very much alive, can be deployed in a positive manner and in concurrence with the kind of realities that exist on the ground today. I think that if the Ahmadinejad, on the domestic front, for example, the options between a victory on the part of those demonstrating or the retention of the present system is immense. Obviously, if the demonstrators are able to succeed in a situation which, like everyone suggested, Mr. Mousavi is not the Mousavi of 2 weeks ago. He has crossed the red line. He is no longer part and parcel of the system, whether he wants it or not. He is not a revolutionary in the sense of being an anti-status quo person, but he has defied the will of the supreme leader. He has declared that he wants to be a martyr. I think he has been thrust into a position of leadership in a special circumstances where even his fiercest critics, and if I may confidentially categorize myself as one of those until 2 weeks ago, but we will not question his position now. The fact is that he is being thrust into a unique position, and he needs to be supported to carry this emblem forward. But if, let's say, this was to succeed, the ramifications for Iranian domestic politics will be significant. You cannot go back, even as an advocate of the Islamic constitution or system or the revolution. There is no going back to Velayat al-Faqih if the forces who are challenging the system on the street are to emerge victorious. Society will open up. If, on the other hand, Ahmadinejad Khamenei tandem was to secure its position, you can be damn sure that repression is going to increase in Iran, that there is no way that they will be able to allow even the small measure of freedom that had gradually come about since the advent of Khatami. Much of it, though repressed, had still succeeded to continue. Iran will become a police state. The foreign policy ramifications of the new situation are equally important. In the case of a government that is truly responsive to the will of the majority of Iranians, nobody wants to be engaged. This is a regime that says it does not want to build a nuclear weapon, yet it pursues policies for which it is punished by the international community for building a nuclear weapon when it alleges that it doesn't want to, and the people who are suffering are the people who are on the receiving end. Now, this is a logic that most people cannot understand within Iran. So there will obviously be major change if the forces of modernization are able to succeed. There is no need for Iran to pursue this. There is no reason for Iran not to be a regional superpower as it has always been. Mr. Kinzer suggested about the role of Iran in the region. Iran has always been a regional superpower. This is not something that came around with Ahmadinejad, making sort of cheap rhetorics and, making a fool of himself in the eyes of the international community by saying who we are. Iran deserves to play a role in the Middle East, but it does not need to play that role by trying to support radicals and terrorists and mayhem and murder from Palestine to Lebanon to Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Persian Gulf, as well as the rest of the Islamic world. So these things will change. But if these people continue, then obviously in the short term you can see greater isolation, more aggression, more aggressive behavior. And when we talk about the Obama and the Obama initiative, last and least, I want to say that in my view, the Obama initiative is out the window. There is no way that that initiative can be pursued with the Ahmadinejad-Khamenei tandem at this stage. There is no way. I mean, it's just unrealistic to even ponder that that situation can continue on in the aftermath of what has taken place, and most importantly, in the aftermath of the position which President Obama himself has taken as conservative and as moderate and as carefully worded as it has been. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a new situation that requires a new look. I am being sort of controversial in saying that we need to throw all the old analysis out the window, look at the situation in terms of what it is today, and see what can be done in order to help Iran in the international arena to to find a way out of the mess which it has created for itself, its people, and the international community. Mr. Mousavi, the United States, the Europeans, the Arab countries, and I would say perhaps many quarters in this country would have preferred to have seen Mr. Mousavi win, in the sense that the United States would have had more time to deal with Afghanistan and Iraq or Pakistan instead of focusing on Iran. The Europeans would have found it much easier to tag along with their sort of constructive engagement and negotiations, whether it gets somewhere or not. You know, that's a different story. But Iran was not a priority. But ladies and gentlemen, what has happened is that Ahmadinejad is there. That scenario is not a realistic one. Iran is a priority. It needs to be dealt with. But it needs to be dealt with a correct perception, a perception that fits the requirement of time, and not a clinging on to certain old beliefs and for the sake of preserving one's reputation, etc., etc., etc. The time, I just say once again, is to look at it with a fresh view and with a constructive and objective view in order to be able to understand it better and more importantly, help solve it in a way that is better for everyone in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for our distinguished guests. Now, since we are on live broadcast on the internet, we will request people who have questions to come over here, so it will be possible for the viewers to listen to your questions. And if I may, I would like to address the first question. We hear a lot about the security forces in Iran going through the streets and being stationed all over the city in Tehran. Now, my question is, we also hear about commanders in the police saying that they are not really involved, that the police departments, the different departments in the police were requested or authorized not to open fire on demonstrators, and they all blame the Basijis, and saying that they are the ones going through the streets and shooting people. Now, is it a way or sort of a way for the regime to say, hey, listen, we are not entirely or directly involved in the shooting of people in the streets, but it's the Basijis who are out of control and taking the control into their own hands?
Let me answer that now connect this.
Okay. So are there any questions from the audience? Can you just please come here?
A question based on my lack of knowledge. We've heard about the possible development of an ultra-conservative philosophy in which God rules Iran. And we've heard about the weakness of the clerics and their declining role in parliament. What's the relationship between these two things?
I spoke a few weeks ago with the so-called Western ambassador in Iran. This was before the elections, about 2 weeks before the election, 3 weeks before election. And he said that actually his fear, the only fear of instability in Iran at that time that he could see, was the feeling that the Revolutionary Guards, being the boys that were recruited in the villages, were actually sick and tired of looking at the luxurious life that went on in those elites that they were actually asked to take care of. And this ambassador said that the only thing that could really worry him at the time was that there would be a revolution staged by the Revolutionary Guards against the very, very wealthy and very laissez-voir elite of the leadership. I wonder if you could, in the wake of what we've been seeing right now and the role that the Revolutionary Guards might be or haven't been playing in this, if you could analyze that. Thank you.
Just Erica, think it's the first time we speak about Iranian revolution. We have spoken about revolutions in Iran, but I think that we're thinking about the Iranian revolutionary movement. That's the first time that we've ended a panel to discuss revolutionary or dramatic change without even mentioning the word bazaar. So I wonder if the bazaar is still relevant, and if it is, what are the positions that they are taking? A word about, it's a comment that I wanted thinking about this movement. I think that the Khomeini had an advantages that Mousavi and others don't have. The Khomeini was very clear-cut. The Shah must go. I think the problem of these reformists today that they cannot say such a thing. They are part of the system. So it's different if you want to reject the system altogether. It's easier to say Islam is the solution. You have an alternative ideology and clear-cut message to the people that you can rally people around you. While I think the current oppositionary or non-oppositionary reformist movement don't have this kind of, they cannot even say someone must go. That to dictatorship comes close to it, but it's not actually there. My question, the question that I want to ask is it all in the family? Because we thought in the previous elections to Majlis that doesn't matter, reformists, pragmatic, conservatives, they are all more or less in the same family. In the distance that Mousavi has gone, and maybe Mrs. Mousavi should be also mentioned here because I think she's more a kind of leader to my test than Mr. Mousavi is. And I think that did they cross a line that is still, that can be considered as an outsider to the regime, or they can go back and cooperate together. Is it going to be a Yeltsin kind of syndrome that we can see that within the family, but ultimately someone else can come and lead to farther away? So these are the questions that I thinking the last few days. I want to say about Obama something, but I'm very glad that Bernard has mentioned it because I think it's not only Obama, but there is a trend of Obamaism. If Tzipi Livni can say about herself that she is the Israeli Obama, certainly Mousavi can say that he is the Iranian Obama. But I think taking more seriously, but I want to reserve this point to the next session because I think it's relevant also to the Iranian regional and Iranian and the powers, but I think it's a very at least a point that I would very much agree with, that without the carrot sent to Iran and without the dialogue, I could not imagine this kind of movement in Tehran. I fully agree with what has been said about it, that the extending hands of friendship to the Iranians was very influential. And then my doubt will be, and then what was the response of Obama when these people went to the streets, which reminded me of 10 years ago or 9 years ago when the children of the revolution, students went to the streets and actually supporting Khatami, and Khatami was not there for them. And I think that the same syndrome in with different players returns, that the people who were gained or were encouraged by Obama went to the street and then they were somehow abandoned. Not that it's easy for President Obama to embrace and support this movement, but I think the expectation of the students, of the young people of Iran, was some kind of American policy that will be much more supportive to the reform movement in Iran.
I want to, in a way, respond to David just now. I get the sense from the analysis that there's sort of two revolutions going on, or two things going on, and that is that on the one hand you have the division amongst the elite, and who are certainly not going for regime change, but in a power struggle. But on the other hand, it looks to me like you have a mass movement that is leaderless, where Rafsanjani, Khatami, and Mousavi himself, and they're not really leading this. They have their battle, while the population, or at least the people on the streets, and they're mainly young people, it seems to me are into regime change, that they are in a different position and pushing for something that's different. that I would like to just hear, that's how it seems to me from the things that I've been hearing. The second thing about, David, what you just said about the disappointment, let's say, in the American reaction, I must say reminded me, so many things here reminded me of the betrayal of the Bolshevik Revolution and the cynics coming to power and so on. But what you said reminded me of the Hungarian Revolution, where there's tremendous disillusionment with the fact that the West didn't come to its aid. You had radio broadcasts supporting the revolution, the rebellion, and no help. It didn't change anything. It didn't change anything in terms of the way in which the people who were conducting that revolution and the generation after felt about their own regime. May have changed their attitude towards what you can expect from outside, but it didn't change the essentials of their opposition to the system. So I think that even though it may have this effect in terms of a disillusionment, I don't think it doesn't seem to me that it would have the kind of long-lasting effect that would dampen the desire or the motives for opposition.
Okay, I don't know if we will be able to answer all the questions, but we will at least give it a try. So we will move from Professor Khonsari.
I wish to just respond to the question posed by Professor Menasheri. There is a clear-cut slogan. First of all, when you look at the events of the last several weeks, this movement started first and foremost as a movement of people acting within the frameworks of the state and of the Constitution in challenging the result of an election which they disputed. This is how it got started. And that's when the million or so people showed up in the streets and the regime was not confronting them in a massive, organized, brutal way, because they were not challenging the tenets of the system. They were challenging the result of the election, which did not question the position of Ayatollah Khamenei or anybody else. As of last Friday, when Ayatollah Khamenei came out as the supreme leader of Iran, by the authority vested in him and his person by the Constitution of Iran, his word is the word of God on earth in a theocracy that is the Islamic Republic of Iran, and he said that this decision is the decision and this is final. So when Mr. Mousavi the next day came out and said that I do not accept this result and I have decided to become a martyr for the cause of my beliefs, Mr. Mousavi was clearly outside the framework of the Constitution, and the demonstrations that took place by the people as of Friday were outside the frameworks of the law as permitted by the Constitution, and hence the demands that were being made became over and above and completely different to what had been demanded the day before. Now, many believe that those people who had demonstrated had a much larger agenda, but they had contained themselves. But as of Saturday, these demands have become quite clear, and they are aimed at regime change. That is the ultimate wish of the demonstrators. And in terms of slogans or being clear-cut, there is a clear-cut slogan. Death to Khamenei is what has been shouted. You see that on the screens of televisions. You see it by this new advent of citizen journalists who have been emailing or whatever, from their video, from their telephones and so on and so forth, which will be shown on CNN and international media. Death to Khamenei is clearly an indication. You interpret death to dictatorship? No, they said death to Khamenei. They said death to Khamenei.
On the streets.
Yeah, they didn't. It wasn't just death to dictator. It was death to Khamenei. Now, death to dictator obviously has a wider interpretation, but death to Khamenei, I think, is quite specific. Now, then you talk about the question about the difference in terms of response between what happened with the students and what happened now. Now, when the students went out on the streets, Colin Powell, I remember him, came and said, well, this is a family dispute. This was exact words that he used. Oh, there was a family dispute in Iran, and they are settling it because although, I mean, the tenets of everybody assumed that George Bush administration wanted regime change, yet what he said, he labeled it, he underplayed and underscored what the students had tried to achieve in terms of getting some kind of international legitimacy for their demands by downplaying it. Obama has not downplayed it. Obama has said that I oppose unjust behavior and oppression of people in the streets. So he has, although it's very cleverly worded, or you might say very conservatively worded, but it is there. So it's quite a difference. And finally, this situation is not leaderless. Mousavi is clearly the leader of this movement. Everybody inside has not challenged him, and people who are outside, political activists across the board, have not undermined his role in that respect, irrespective of different agendas that they've had. Thank you very much.
The corruption of the Iranian elite has been a fact of life that has become more and more pronounced in recent years. I believe one of the main reasons that Ahmadinejad won the last election was resentment about Rafsanjani. Rafsanjani is one of the biggest crooks east of Suez, and everybody in Iran knows this. When he embraced Mousavi just before this election, that did not help Mousavi. That definitely brought votes, I believe, to Ahmadinejad. Now, I think we've now gotten to a point where people have gotten beyond that. The movement has taken on such momentum that people who support the idea of change are not going to stay in their homes because they don't like the fact that Rafsanjani and other corrupt people are on the side of Mousavi. We're past that now. But that was a bad alliance that I think helped drag down Mousavi in the period right before the election. I would say, I want to make one other point. I was in Iran when Khatami was elected. I covered that election for the New York Times. And I can tell you one similarity between that election and this election. 3 weeks before the election of 1997, the majority of people in Iran had never heard of Khatami. It's an astonishing thing. That was astonishing in this campaign, but it's not the first time. You know, we in America are already talking about who's going to be running in 2012. That doesn't work in Iran. Everything happens very quickly, and we're seeing that again. Now, if Mousavi had some bad allies before and was able to overcome that, there's one difficult alliance that I don't think he could overcome, and that's why I like what Obama is doing. Don't bring the United States into this. That is a kiss of death. The frustration and the anger at the outside world is intense. Anybody in Iran who looks at America pointing a finger at Iran and saying, you should be a democracy over there, is going to roll their eyes and say, wait a minute, we had a democracy here until you came over here and destroyed it and set this whole process in motion. If it hadn't been for the intervention of 1953, quite possibly the Shah would never have emerged, the religious regime would never have emerged, the nuclear crisis would never have emerged. So the idea that the U.S. should come in and play a role here, I think, is a very dangerous one. It's not analogous to a westernized country like Hungary. It's a completely different situation where people are acutely aware of foreign intervention, and I don't think it's an accident that you have not heard any leader or spokesman for this movement in Iran now calling for America to come in. You don't hear that from Ibrahim Yazdi or Mousavi or Shirin Ebadi or anyone else. I'd like to be guided by people who we feel comfortable with, like those people in Iran. When they start calling for American intervention, I might change my mind, but I don't see that happening any time before the 12th Imam shows up.
About security forces and IRGC, I do believe that the whole country of Iran is divided, is split into pieces. So even the security forces, the police in the streets, they are professional now. They are not only groups of smugglers and looties beating the people. And the Basiji, a part of the Basiji, were used to contest and to be opposed to the demonstrators. Even in the Basiji, we are speaking about the 500,000 or maybe 200,000 Basiji in Iran. But most of the Basiji are Basiji of the university, Basiji of Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Industry. In all administration, you have got Basiji, and of course Basiji of the police, of the military, of the army, of the Pasdaran. And these people are, of course, very active. But other Basiji exist also. And so I think that for the time being, the RGC and the Pasdaran are ready to do something to defend Iran, the state of Iran, the nation of Iran, maybe the Islamic Republic of Iran, but maybe they're not ready to be killed for Mr. Khamenei or Mr. Mousavi. So I do think that today they are very quiet, behind the curtain. They didn't do anything. They just said, we don't want to shoot at the people as the army of the Shah did. And so they are there, ready to do something if it is needed. Because they know that the country is in danger. The nuclear issue is there. The danger from Iraq, from the Gulf, from Pakistan and Afghanistan is there. And so Iran cannot stay as an unstable country. Instability in Iran cannot go on for years. They have to find a solution within a short period of time. And so these people are ready. About the traditional institutions and forces in Iran like the bazaar, I think the Islamic Republic has destroyed the traditional system as the bazaar, as the clerical system itself. The clerics are weak now because the traditional system for the clerics to be powerful was to get money from the people. Now so it was a sort of democratic system. Now they get the money from oil and from the state. So the relation between the clergy and the people is broken by Islamic Republic. And so the network they had on the time of Khomeini doesn't exist anymore. Even the Bazari, which exists more or less in the 70s, doesn't exist anymore. They are now involved in ministries of commerce and trade and industry. They're not able to have this link with the clerics, with the people. And so we cannot find today Iran, in today's Iran, all the networks, all the traditional social, political system we had in the 70s. And I think that's very important to think about the future, and especially we're speaking about martyrdom and the 7 days and the 40 days. It was very important 30 years ago. But now, who is ready to be killed for mourning ceremony in Iran? I don't think this system of martyrdom is no longer, of mourning, is no longer alive in Iran. The people who are working on internet with Twitter and so on, these people who would like to have independent but good relation with the US, with respect and dignity, as you said, these people are not thinking about using mourning as a tool of political tool. I think we have to think different, as you said previously.
Considering the question of Basij and the Revolutionary Guard, Basijis have been used systematically in the past 30 years as the first layer of attacking demonstrations, and they have the nickname of white shirts, like the brown shirts of Mussolini, Italy. And these white shirt people are the first wave of attacking the peaceful demonstration. After that comes the IRGC, and so far there's not been a need for regular military. And whether or not there is a fracture within these systems, we don't know, but most probably is, because in the 1997 election, rumors are that 75% of the IRGC members voted for Khatami. So there must be a strong pro-reform, progressive movement within these military establishments that we are not aware of or is not publicized. As far as the role of clergy and why is weakened, because it went through a metamorphosis. The Shiite clerical system was on the side of people, so to speak, for generations. and his raison d'etre was to mediate between people and the rulers, and being a place for people, a refuge, like I mentioned before. In the shrines, it was a refuge for oppositional groups. And when Reza Shah stepped into the Mashhad shrine and kicked one of the opposition people out of there, it became a very important insult. And it was taken against him so badly that when the revolution took place, Khomeini made a point of finding the commander who had made this possible. And at the time, he was in his 90s, and he was on a wheelchair, and Khomeini brought him out and got him shot by his soldiers. So those shrines were the very respectable place of refuge. Now they are shut down to people. Clergy is being more and more turned into like the Sunni tradition of muftis, meaning being the government employees. They have lost their influence inside the country because they have shifted position, and it is no longer the old clerical establishment that we knew. Now, in terms of whether or not this is a revolution and whether or not this is meant to overthrow the regime, I think the movement takes heart from the fact that one faction is fighting against another, so there is something in it that makes them more courageous, because they know it's eventually Mousavi. And again, back to symbolism. If you look at the girls who are demonstrating, you notice that they keep their veil on. Okay, that's a very important symbolism. An anti-establishment movement that goes against the Islamic regime should take the veils off right away. That would be a symbol of opposition if you wanted to maneuver that side. Now, the reason may be because the movement is at the initial stages, and it is not ripe enough, it's not mature enough to go for the grits of the regime and ask for a regime change. But at this point, they use the nebulous term death to dictator, which could be used for, and traditionally used for Ahmadinejad, and now is finding another ramification, and that is Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, about the Obama effect, obviously, Obama effect is very important, not because of what he said in Egypt, but because of himself. If you follow the weblogs in Iran and conversations that takes place, you notice that a lot of people said, more power to this country, meaning America, that elects a son of a slave to its presidency, or more power to this wonderful country that elects a Muslim to its president. So it had a tremendous impact on Iranian psyche in terms of how social equality could be possible, and how people from because the Iranian government has been saying for 30 years that blacks are mistreated and burned and beaten in America. So the election of Ahmadinejad was a major movement that impacted the Iranian psyche. But what really kicked off the movement, more than Obama's speech, was the revolution of raising expectations. The revolution of raising expectation, meaning the election had all the facade, all the appearance of a real election. It really energized people. Millions of people voted, and when it became televised, okay, that really turned into a very new phenomenon that the regime could not have predicted. And that those televised debates were probably the most important democratic event in the history of the Islamic Republic. Because through those debates, these people faced each other, and they talked about a lot of facts and issues that we were not aware of it before. This level of sincerity and transparency raised the expectation for a real elections. And when the people figured out that whether or not it's real or not, I'm not sure, but when they notably saw that the Ahmadinejad camp got 10 million votes over, it became a very strong message of fraudulence, and they rebelled against it. It is clearly a classic case of revolution of raising expectations. Okay. Now, lastly, are we facing a revolution? Mr. Hourcade said that it is a revolution because we are talking about millions of people. It could be a revolution, but so far it's an uprising, I think. To turn into a revolution, it needs organization, it needs leaders. Leaders, as I said, are accidental leaders who are thrusted into their position. They don't want a regime change. You know, Mousavi wants to be a president. That's about it. And his platform is not a whole lot different from Ahmadinejad. His wife, as a matter of fact, is much more progressive than him. So Karoubi was a terrible Speaker of the House. He was always giving in when the need was for decisive action. But the mass movement is so strong and so energetic that is turning these people into real leaders.
Very shortly, first I would advise not to refer to the opposition as monolithic. And yes, Mousavi is right now the leader of this opposition, and he promised to go till the end, but the end for him is different than the end some of the opposition are calling for. His end is new elections, and perhaps some of the opposition end is the death of Khamenei, but we should not refer to everyone as the same. Have they crossed the line? Some of them, yes. As I said, Mousavi probably crossed the line. But it is not incidental that Rafsanjani has said almost nothing during the 2 weeks. I think because he knows he has much to lose. And if you read the articles published in Jumhuriya Islami, which is associated with Rafsanjani, you can tell that they call for moderation, and they say we should do what the Rahbar, the supreme leader, tells us to do. Last remark concerning the ultra-conservative. Of course, I do not mean to say that the ultra-conservatives have become the majority of the clergy. On the contrary, in the elections to the Assembly of Experts in December 2006, they were the minority. What I meant is that if the stability of the regime is at stake, Khamenei might be obliged to accept their interpretation for the Islamic Revolution.
I would like to thank for this fascinating panel to Professor Khonsari, Professor Kinzer, Professor Hourcade, Professor Nafisi, and of course Raz. And I would like to thank you for your patience, and I'm looking forward to our next session following a short break of refreshments outside. Thank you.